For 3 straight months, my neighbor complained that I was tap dancing in my apartment every night. The property manager and the police came to mediate, installing a decibel meter in my living room. At midnight, the needle on the meter went wild, showing the noise level had rocketed to 100 decibels. A cop yanked the covers off me and pinned me to the bed. "Don't move." I was groggy, completely bewildered, and pointed to my legs. The officer froze. My neighbor, who had followed them in, collapsed to the floor in shock. Because my pajama pants were empty. I'm a bilateral, above-the-knee amputee. And in the dead silent room, a frantic, rhythmic tapping echoed clearly from the ceiling above. If it's not you, who the hell is it?" My neighbor, Mark Peterson, was screaming in my face, his finger jabbing at the air between us. He was so close I could feel the spit from his words on my cheek. I wheeled my chair back a few feet. "I'll say it again," I said, my voice flat. "I'm not making any noise." "Bullshit. You're the only single guy on this floor, up at all hours. If you're not dancing, who is?" The older cop standing behind Mark frowned. "Sir, please calm down. We're here to resolve the problem." The other, younger officer placed a black, boxy device on my coffee table. "This is a professional decibel meter linked to our phones," he explained. "If there's any noise tonight, it'll record it in real time, and we'll get an alert." Mark sneered. "All this high-tech crap. Let's see if he dares to pull anything tonight." The police escorted a fuming Mark out, and the older officer turned back to me. "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Hayes. We'll get to the bottom of this." I nodded and shut the door. It was already 11 o'clock. I wheeled myself into the bedroom, transferred onto the bed, and pulled the covers up. I stared at the ceiling. Total silence. For the last 3 months, I'd been on the verge of a breakdown. My name is Ethan Hayes. I lost my legs in a car accident a year ago. I make a living as a freelance translator, which means my hours are a mess, but I sure as hell wasn't tap dancing at midnight. But Mark from downstairs, he was at my door every single day. He claimed that at 12 o'clock sharp, the tap dancing would start, so loud his kid couldn't sleep. I explained my situation more times than I could count. He didn't believe a word of it. The property manager tried to intervene twice. Mark just pointed at my wheelchair and said, "Don't give me that act. I see you in that chair during the day, but who knows? Maybe at night you strap on some prosthetics and throw a party." I couldn't fathom the logic. I was exhausted. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to drift off. I don't know how much time passed before a violent pounding on my door jolted me awake. "Police! Open up! Ethan, open the door!" An officer yelled. A shot of adrenaline went through me as my bedroom door was thrown open. 2 cops rushed in. The older one ripped my comforter off and slammed me back against the mattress. "Don't move." I was in total shock. "Officer, what's going on?" Still playing dumb. Mark, who had followed them in, pointed toward the living room, a look of vindictive triumph on his face. 100 decibels. The meter almost exploded, and you're still going to say you weren't dancing. My head was foggy with sleep. I had no idea what was happening. I pointed a finger down at my own legs. The officer holding me down followed my gaze. He froze. My pajama pants from the top of my thighs down were just 2 hollow tubes of fabric. The smirk on Mark's face evaporated. His jaw hung open. He staggered backward until his legs gave out, and he crumpled to the floor. "Legs? Your legs?" The apartment fell dead silent. And in that silence, top, 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 a clear, urgent, rhythmic tapping sound started up from the ceiling directly over our heads. Too, the sound was strange. It wasn't the sound of someone walking. It had a powerful rhythm, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, like someone was stomping hard on a wooden floor. It was exactly what Mark had described as tap dancing. The senior officer, Detective Miller, was the first to snap out of it. He let go of me, his expression turning grim. "Who lives upstairs?" I shook my head. "I just moved in 6 months ago. I don't know them." The younger officer, Evans, was already pulling up records on his phone. "Apartment 1201. Registered owner is Eleanor Vance, female, 68 years old." Detective Miller immediately spoke into his radio. "Lou, get up here with the building manager. We need to check 1201. Mark was still on the floor, pointing a trembling finger at the ceiling. "A ghost! It's a ghost!" Miller shot him a glare. "Shut up. There are no ghosts." He turned back to me, his tones softening. "Mr. Hayes, I'm very sorry. We've made a mistake." I just shook my head. indicating it was fine. In reality, a cold sweat was running down my own back. This wasn't the first time I'd heard the sound, but before it had always been faint, and I dismissed it as normal apartment noise. I never imagined it could be 100 decibels loud. A moment later, the building manager and another officer came running up, out of breath. Detective Mrs. Vance from 1201 went to stay with her son last month. She said she'd be gone for half a year. The apartment is empty, the manager panted. Empty. Miller's brow furrowed even deeper. The tapping from the ceiling continued. Top, 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 top. It was as if it was answering the manager's statement. The color drained from everyone's faces. Mark's teeth were chattering. Detective, this building is haunted. We're going up, Miller decided. The group immediately rushed out of my apartment and headed for the elevator. I wheeled myself to my doorway to watch. I saw them gathered in front of 1201, knocking hard. Police! Is anyone in there? No answer. Only the rhythmic tapping, muffled but still audible through the door. The building manager fumbled with a master key, his hands shaking too much to get in the lock. Let me, Miller said, taking the key and inserting it smoothly. The door swung open. A thick, musty smell of dust hit them. The apartment was pitch black. Miller clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The furniture in the living room was covered in white drop cloths, and a heavy layer of dust coated the floor. It was clearly not a place where anyone was living. But just as the flashlight beam swept across the center of the living room, the tapping from the ceiling stopped. The world went silent, a silence that made your skin crawl. Officer Evans stepped inside and fumbled along the wall, flipping on the lights. Under the stark, white fluorescent glare, the empty room seemed even more eerie. They searched every room. Bedroom, kitchen, bathroom. Nothing. The windows were all locked from the inside. Miller walked out onto the balcony. The dust on the floor was undisturbed. Not a single footprint. This is impossible, the manager muttered. Mark was leaning against the doorframe, barely able to stand. Miller walked out, his face grave as he looked at me. Mr. Hayes, are you absolutely certain the sound you heard came from upstairs? I nodded forcefully. 100%. He fell silent. Everyone was silent. A formless fear began to spread through the hallway as they all looked at each other. Just then, meow. A cat's cry came from the direction of 1201's bedroom. Everyone jumped. Miller spun around and charged back into the apartment. A moment later, he walked out holding a scrawny black cat. So it was just a cat, Officer Evans said, breathing a sigh of relief. No, Miller said, shaking his head. He pointed to the cat's paws. Look, we crowded in for a closer look. Each of the black cat's 4 paws had a small, hard plastic cap fitted over it, like some kind of protective cover. Miller set the cat down on the hallway floor. The cat took a few steps. Top, top, top. The sound it made was identical to the tap-dancing noise. 3, what the hell is going on? Evans said, dumbfounded. Miller's expression grew even darker. Someone left this cat here intentionally, put these things on its paws, specifically to create a disturbance. Who? And what? Eleanor Vance's son. Miller concluded almost instantly. Manager, do you have his contact info? Yes, I do. The manager frantically searched through his phone. Mark stared at the black cat pacing in the hallway, his face a sickly shade of green. He finally understood that he had been wrongly accusing me for 3 months. He walked over to me, opened his mouth, but no words came out. Finally, he bowed deeply. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. Miller had his partner take the cat, then said a few calming words to me and Mark, telling us to go back and get some rest. He promised to notify us of any new developments. The crowd dispersed, and the hallway fell quiet again. I went back inside and closed the door. Even though it seemed like there was a lead, I felt a deeper sense of unease. Why would Eleanor Vance's son do something like this? Was it just a prank? I had a feeling it wasn't that simple. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I was woken by a phone call. It was Detective Miller. Mr. Hayes, we can't get through to Eleanor's son. His phone is off. We ran his information. His name is Kyle Vance, 32, unemployed. What about Eleanor herself? I asked. We can't reach her either. We went to Kyle's registered address, but the neighbors said they haven't seen him in almost a month. My stomach sank. Detective, something is very wrong here. That's what we're thinking, Miller's voice was heavy. "We've officially opened an investigation. If you hear anything else or notice anything unusual, call me immediately." Okay. After hanging up, I couldn't sit still. I wheeled myself to the window and looked up at the apartment above me, 1201. The windows were completely obscured by drawn blinds. You couldn't see a thing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that a pair of eyes was watching me from behind them. The next few days were unnervingly quiet. Not a single sound from upstairs. Mark posted a public apology to me on the community's Nextdoor page and even tried to bring by a fruit basket, which I refused. I wasn't in the mood to deal with him. My entire focus was on the apartment above. On the fifth night I was working. It was around midnight again. Suddenly, a dull thud echoed from the ceiling. Thump! Like something heavy had been dropped. My heart leaped into my throat. I immediately grabbed my phone, ready to call Detective Miller. Just then, thump! Another one. It was followed by a strange, scraping sound. Scrape, scrape. It sounded like someone was dragging a heavy sack across the floor, slowly. The sound moved from the direction of the living room toward the bedroom, and then stopped directly above me. I held my breath, not daring to move. The only sound in the room was the frantic pounding of my own heart. After about 10 minutes, the scraping sound started again. This time, it moved from directly above my head back toward the living room. Then another heavy thud. Thump. After that, everything fell silent again. I sat there, gripping my phone, my palms slick with sweat. I didn't call the police. I knew it would be useless. They couldn't get in. The next morning, I called Detective Miller and told him what I'd heard. He was silent on the other end for a long time. "Ethan, don't panic. We're in the process of getting a search warrant for 1201. Try to stay out of your apartment today, if you can. Go somewhere else for the day." "I understand." I hung up, but I'd already made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. I got on my computer and searched on Amazon, mini drone with camera and microphone. I had to see for myself what was inside apartment 1201. For the drone arrived that same afternoon via rush delivery. I spent an hour learning the controls. Once it was completely dark, I drew my curtains and opened my window just a crack. The drone was tiny, no bigger than my palm, and very quiet when it flew. I navigated it carefully out the window and slowly ascended. The blinds in 1201 were shut tight, but the slats on the Venetian blinds had gaps. I found an angle, hovered the drone outside the window, and aimed the camera through one of the cracks. An image appeared on my screen. It was the living room of 1201. It looked just as the police had described. Furniture covered in white cloths, floors thick with dust. But something was different. In the middle of the room, the corner of one of the cloths had been pulled back. It revealed a huge, old-fashioned, dark brown wooden trunk. The trunk looked incredibly heavy and was secured with a large, brass padlock. My blood ran cold. The thudding sound from last night. Could have been this trunk? I maneuvered the drone, trying to get a clearer view. Just as the camera focused on the trunk shifted, just slightly. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I stared, unblinking at the screen. A few seconds later, the trunk moved again. It was unmistakable this time. My scalp pricked. There was something in the trunk. Something alive. I immediately thought of the black cat with the plastic caps on its paws. Had Kyle Vance locked some other living creature inside this box? I suppressed my rising fear and kept watching. The drone's microphone picked up a faint noise. Breathing. It was rapid, suppressed. Like someone was desperately trying to breathe without making a sound. My hands started to shake. That was no animal. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be calm. I needed evidence. Clearer evidence. I steered the drone slowly, inch by inch, closer to the window. I wanted to record a clearer audio track. The drone was less than a foot from the glass when, "Who's there?" A man's voice exploded from inside the room. I flinched, and the drone nearly smashed into the window. The image on my screen shook violently. I saw a dark figure rush out from the bedroom. It was Kyle. He was back. He scanned the room suspiciously, his eyes finally landing on the window. He saw my drone. His face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He grabbed a vase from a nearby table and hurled it at the window. Crash! The drone's feed went black. Signal lost. I shot up in my wheelchair, my heart hammering against my ribs. He saw me. I immediately dialed Detective Miller's number. "Detective, Kyle is in 1201. He's back. There's a trunk in the living room with a live person inside." I shouted, the words tumbling out of me. "Ethan, calm down. We're on our way. Lock your door and do not come out." Detective Miller's voice was more tense than I had ever heard it. I hung up, raced to my front door, threw the deadbolt, and shoved a heavy bookcase in front of it for good measure. I could hear a tremendous crashing sound from upstairs. Kyle was destroying things. He was definitely coming for me next. I wheeled myself into the furthest bedroom, my hand wrapped tightly around the handle of a steak knife. Minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. I let out a small breath of relief. The police were here. I heard a swarm of footsteps in the hallway, followed by Detective Miller's shout. "Kyle Vance, this is the police. You're surrounded. Open the door." There was no response from upstairs. "Breach it." A loud bang echoed as the door to 1201 was forced open. I heard the sounds of officers storming in, shouting commands. But I didn't hear Kyle's voice. He wasn't in there. A terrible premonition washed over me. Just then, there was a knock on my door. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, slow. "Mr. Hayes, it's Detective Miller." It was Miller's voice. But I didn't move, because my peephole was completely black. Someone was on the other side, covering it with their hand. The police were all upstairs. From the other side of my door, a cold voice slithered through the crack. "You tell anyone about the box, and I'll kill you." My blood froze in my veins. It was Kyle. He was never in 1201. He'd anticipated the police would go upstairs and had come down to my door to corner me. "Open the door. I know you're in there." His voice was calm, but it was a terrifying, unhinged calm. I pressed myself against the bookcase, holding my breath. "Not opening up, huh?" He let out a short, sharp laugh. "You think this door can stop me?" I heard the scraping of metal. He was picking the lock. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I looked around for a better weapon. There was only the steak knife. I gripped the handle, my palms sweating. "Detective Miller, he's at my door." "Miller!" I screamed with every ounce of strength I had. From upstairs, I heard Miller's panicked voice. "Ethan, hang on. We're coming down." Hearing the police, Kyle worked faster. The lock clicked. It was open, but he couldn't push the door open because of the bookcase. "Get out of the way." Kyle started ramming the door with his body again and again. With every impact, the bookcase shuddered and slid. I saw Detective Miller and several officers bounding down the stairs. "Kyle, stop." Kyle glanced back at them, his eyes burning with a venomous hatred. He didn't stop. He threw his shoulder against the door even harder. Bang! The bookcase was shoved back, creating a gap. I saw half of his face, his eyes webbed with broken blood vessels. "Get him!" Two young officers tackled him, wrestling him to the ground. He kept struggling, roaring like a caged animal. Detective Miller rushed to my door and helped me move the bookcase. "Ethan, are you okay?" I shook my head, my body feeling weak and drained. The trunk upstairs," I said, pointing at the ceiling. Miller understood immediately. Leaving two officers to restrain Kyle, he led the others back up to 1201. I followed them out. The door to 1201 was wide open. The living room was a wreck. The shattered remains of my drone lay on the floor. Every eye in the room was fixed on the brown wooden trunk. Miller walked over and tugged on the brass padlock. "It's locked." He turned to look at the cuffed and struggling Kyle. Kyle grinned, a raw, chilling sight. "You're never getting it open." Miller didn't waste any more time. "Get the bolt cutters." An officer ran downstairs to retrieve them. As we waited, the trunk started making a sound again. Not a shifting sound, a tapping. Talp, talp, talp. Slow and deliberate, perfectly rhythmic. Like someone was knocking from the inside with their knuckles. Everyone heard it. A young officer couldn't help but ask the man on the floor, "What the hell did you lock in there?" Kyle closed his eyes and said nothing. Soon, the bolt cutters arrived. Snap! With a sharp crack, the brass lock was severed. Two officers stepped forward and, with a combined effort, heaved the heavy lid open. The moment the lid was lifted, everyone gasped. Curled up inside the trunk was a woman. Her hands and feet were bound, her mouth sealed with duct tape. She was wearing a thin nightgown. She was so emaciated she looked like a skeleton, her face as pale as parchment. But she was alive. Her eyes were wide open, filled with terror and hope. When she saw us, tears instantly streamed down her cheeks. Detective Miller rushed forward and ripped the tape from her mouth. She gasped sucking in fresh air, and let out a hoarse, ragged sob. "Help me." Paramedics rushed in and carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, carrying her out. Kyle watched the woman being rescued, his expression a storm of anger and defeat, which finally settled into a dead, empty calm. I looked at the now empty trunk. The inside was covered in scratches, etched by fingernails. One section of the wood was worn smooth and pale. It was the spot where, day after day, she had been kicking with her heel. The so-called tap dancing had been her SOS. The rescued woman's name was Jessica Riley, 28 years old. She was Kyle Vance's ex-girlfriend. At the hospital, she haltingly told the police what had happened. A year ago, unable to bear Kyle's controlling nature and violent temper, Jessica had broken up with him. He refused to accept it and continued to harass her. A few weeks ago, Kyle had lured her to his mother's empty apartment, claiming he had some of her things to return. The moment she stepped inside, he knocked her unconscious. When she woke up, she was in the trunk. "He's a psychopath," Jessica whispered from her hospital bed, her voice weak, but her eyes burning with hatred. "He gave me just enough water and a few crackers each day to keep me alive. He told me that unless I agreed to get back together with him, he would leave me in there to die." Detective Miller asked, "What about his mother, Eleanor?" "He tricked her," Jessica said. "He told his mom he was going to renovate the apartment for her and that she should stay with him for 6 months. She had no idea I was locked up here." The room was silent. This was a premeditated kidnapping. Kyle had exploited his mother's trust and the empty apartment to create the perfect prison. "What about the cat?" I had to ask. A flicker of fear crossed Jessica's face. "He put it in there on purpose. He put those little plastic things on its paws and let it run around the apartment. He told me it was double insurance. If I made any noise, the neighbors would just think it was the cat. And if the neighbors complained about the noise, he could use that to make it seem like the person downstairs was the problem, to divert suspicion." A chill went down my spine. Mark's complaints against me had been part of Kyle's plan all along. He relished manipulating people, muddying the waters. He would also play recordings periodically. Jessica continued. "Sometimes footsteps, sometimes music, always turned up really loud. He said he wanted my calls for help to be drowned out by even louder noises. He wanted me to feel completely hopeless." I finally understood why the decibel meter had registered 100 decibels. It wasn't the sound of Jessica's kicking. It was a recording Kyle had played. He used one noise to cover up another. One lie to cover up a monstrous crime. The man's twisted foresight was terrifying. After taking her statement, Detective Miller came out and put a hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, we owe you one. If it wasn't for your persistence and that drone, I can't imagine what would have happened." I shook my head. I just did what anyone should have done. The case was solved. Kyle Vance was charged with kidnapping and assault. He was facing a long time in prison. News of the incident spread through the apartment complex. The people who had backed Mark up on the next-door thread went silent. Mark showed up at my door again, this time with a bottle of whiskey. I let him in. He set the bottle on the table and stood there awkwardly, unable to meet my eyes. "Ethan, I'm a real piece of work." He raised a hand and slapped himself hard across the face. "I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have accused you. I shouldn't have treated you like that." His eyes started to redden. "My wife tore me a new one. My son found out. He told me he hates me now." I watched him quietly. "It's over now," I said. He looked up surprised. "You don't hate me?" "I do," he answered honestly. "But I don't have the time or the energy to keep hating you. My life was hard enough as it was. I didn't want to carry the weight of his mistakes, too." Mark fell silent. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This is just a small token. I know it can't make up for anything." I pushed the envelope back toward him. "Take it back. I don't need it. From now on, just watch your mouth and control your temper. You owe that to Jessica, and you owe it to yourself." Mark looked at me, and finally he nodded. He picked up the envelope, gave me another deep, respectful nod, and left. Watching him go, I felt no satisfaction or sense of revenge, just a profound weariness. The whole nightmare was finally over. A few days later, Jessica's condition had improved. She contacted me through Detective Miller, saying she wanted to meet. We met in the hospital's garden. She looked much better than she had that night. Still painfully thin, but there was a light in her eyes. She was also in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse. Mr. Hayes, she said, managing a small smile when she saw me. Please call me Ethan. We stopped by a bench. The early winter sun felt warm on our skin. Thank you, she said. They were the first words she spoke to me. If it wasn't for you, I would have died in that box. You saved my life. I shook my head. Your call for help is what saved you. That tapping, that was your last hope, wasn't it? Her eyes welled up, and she nodded. I kicked every single day, as long as I had any strength left. I didn't know if anyone could hear me, or if they would even care if they did. I just knew I couldn't die like that. Looking at her, it was like looking at a reflection of myself. A year ago, trapped in a wreckage of my car, I had done the same thing, using my last bit of strength to bang on the crumpled door. We were both people who had clawed our way back from the brink of despair. It's all over now, I said. Yeah, she wiped a tear away and smiled. Detective Miller told me you're a translator. That's right. I work from home. That's wonderful, she said, gazing into the distance. I can't wait to start my new life, too. We talked for a long time. About our jobs, about books and movies. We didn't mention Kyle. We didn't mention the trunk. It was as if we were just two friends who had happened to meet in a park. As she was leaving, she said to me, Ethan, when I get out of here, can I buy you a coffee? Of course, I smiled. As I watched the nurse wheel her away, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in a very long time. Maybe a new life wasn't just waiting for her. However, the peace I thought I'd found didn't last. A week later, Detective Miller called me again. His tone was strange. Ethan, could you come down to the station? There's a new development in the Kyle Vance case. A new development? I thought he confessed to everything. He did. But we've discovered something we can't explain. My heart started to pound again. What is it? It's better if you see for yourself. I rushed to the police station. Detective Miller led me to an observation room next to an interrogation room, separated by a one-way mirror. I could see Kyle inside. He was sitting in a chair, handcuffed, his face a complete blank. He looked nothing like the raging animal from that night. What's with him? I asked. He's been like this since we brought him in. Doesn't talk unless spoken to, doesn't resist, answers every question factually, Miller said. But when we questioned him about the details of the noise, he gave us a piece of information. Miller hit play on a device. A sound filled the room. Top, 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 top. It was the familiar tap dancing. This is the audio file we found on Kyle's phone, Miller said. That's not surprising. Jessica said he played recordings. That's not the strange part. Miller paused the playback. We had a forensics lab analyze the audio. And guess how this sound was made? I shook my head. Miller's expression turned dead serious. It's not a cat's paws and plastic caps. And it's not a person tap dancing. It's the sound of human finger bones tapping on the inside of a coffin lid. My mind went blank. What are you talking about? I'm saying, Miller said, enunciating every word, that the audio file on Kyle's phone, which he got from God knows where, is a recording of someone's actual final moments. A deep chill started in my feet and shot through my entire body. Why would he use a sound so evil? He said it brings fear, Miller said, gesturing toward Kyle in the other room. He said he wanted Jessica to break down in terror, and he wanted the neighbors who heard it to become paranoid and suspicious of each other. He enjoyed the feeling. I looked through the glass at Kyle. He was still motionless like a statue. But I knew now what a depraved and twisted soul was hiding behind that placid exterior. What about Eleanor? I asked. Did you find her? Miller's face darkened. We did. We found her at another property Kyle was renting. My chest tightened. Is she okay? Miller was quiet for a long moment before he finally spoke. She's dead. The coroner's report says she died of sudden, massive heart attack. Time of death was approximately 1 month ago. Around the same day, Kyle locked Jessica in the trunk. I was stunned. How could? Our theory, Miller said, is that Eleanor somehow found out about Kyle's plan, or maybe even saw Jessica imprisoned. The shock of what her son was doing likely triggered the heart attack. Kyle didn't call for help. He hid her body in a chest freezer in the rental unit. The room started to spin. I had to brace myself against the wall to keep from falling. I thought this was a kidnapping case. I never imagined that behind it lay the sin of matricide. Kyle didn't just imprison the woman he claimed to love. He had directly caused the death of his own mother. He wasn't human. He was a monster. Why didn't he get rid of the body? I asked, my voice trembling. He said he was waiting for all this to be over so he could give his mother a beautiful funeral. Miller's voice was laced with scorn. He said he loved his mother. I couldn't listen anymore. I stared at the man in the chair, filled with a profound sense of disgust. He had destroyed Jessica's life, killed his own mother, and thrown an entire building into chaos. And yet he could sit there calmly and talk about love. He'll get what he deserves, Miller said. With all the charges combined, he'll never see the outside of a prison again. I nodded and walked out of the police station. The sunlight outside was blinding. I looked up at the sky, but all I felt was an icy coldness inside. What I thought was the end was just the tip of the iceberg. The trunk hadn't just held Jessica. It also held Kyle's rotten, decaying heart and the soul of a mother who would never rest in peace. The building would finally be quiet. But what had happened there, the people who had died, the souls who had been broken, could never be erased. I went home, and for the first time, my small apartment felt vast and empty. I turned on every single light. I needed the light. Now the rest of the case details came from Detective Miller over the phone. Kyle Vance was indicted on multiple felonies, including kidnapping, assault, and desecration of a human corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jessica underwent extensive physical and psychological therapy. The day she was discharged, she sent me a text. "Ethan, I'm free. Thank you." Attached was a photo. It was her, smiling in the sun. She was still thin, but her face radiated life. I replied with a simple, smiley face emoji. We never saw each other again. Perhaps, for us, the best way forward was to wish each other well from a distance. To let that shared trauma remain in the past. Mark Peterson and his family moved away. He sold the apartment. The property manager told me he left without saying goodbye to anyone. Apartment 1201 was put on the market by Eleanor's relatives. The asking price was low, but it sat empty. That apartment became the unspoken taboo of our building. My life, finally, returned to normal. Translating, reading, listening to music. But I developed a new habit. Every night at midnight, I would instinctively look up at my ceiling. Even though there was never a sound, I knew that some things, once heard, can never be forgotten. Several months later, just as the memory was beginning to fade, Detective Miller called one last time. "Ethan, there was one last loose end in the Vance case. We just tied it up." "What was it?" "That recording. The one of the finger bones tapping on the coffin." Miller's voice sounded exhausted, but also relieved. "We could never trace its origin, and Kyle refused to talk. Then, a few days ago, police in another state busted a ring that was producing and selling graphic, violent videos. On their servers, we found the original video file for that audio. My heart seized. What was on a video? It was a documentary about a folk tradition," Miller said, choosing his words carefully. "In a remote, rural area, there's an ancient burial custom. They place a living person inside the coffin to act as a guide for the deceased. The video documented this entire process. The person they put inside, they tapped on a lid for 7 days and 7 nights before they went silent. I stood there, holding the phone, speechless. Kyle was an amateur folklorist. He bought the video through some underground channel. He said he felt there was power in that sound. He extracted the audio to use as the soundtrack for his entire twisted plan." Miller sighed. "Now, every piece of the puzzle fits. This case is officially closed." After I hung up, I sat in my wheelchair for a long, long time. Finger bones, a coffin, a guide for the dead. I finally understood the full, depraved landscape of Kyle's mind. He wasn't just making noise. He was conducting a perverse, self-important ritual. He had cast Jessica as the sacrifice, the neighbors as his audience, his mother's death as just another part of the ceremony. He saw himself as a god, pulling all the strings, but he was just a pathetic creature, consumed by his own inner darkness. I deleted Detective Miller's contact information from my phone. I didn't want any more connection to that story. I opened my laptop and accepted a new translation project. It was about marine biology. I wanted to focus on something clean, pure, and far away from the complexities of humankind. 1 year later, my life was as calm as still water. I moved to a larger, ground-floor apartment with a small patio. I got a golden retriever, and every day I'd take him for a walk around the new complex. I stopped working through the night. adopting a routine of sleeping early and waking up early. My translation work was going well, and I even started to write a little on the side. Jessica would occasionally send me postcards from her travels around the world. In the photos, her skin was tanned a healthy brown, and her smile was brighter than the sun. We had an unspoken agreement never to mention the past, only to share the present. I sold my old apartment. I never went back to that building. Everything about Kyle, about Mark, about apartment 1201 felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'd wake from a dream and faintly hear that tap, tap, tap sound, but I was no longer afraid. I would open my eyes, look at the moonlight shining on my patio, and listen to the sound of my dog's steady breathing. I would tell myself it was just a nightmare. And now, the nightmare was over. One afternoon, I was out on the patio, watering my flowers. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it. Hello. Hi. Is this Mr. Ethan Hayes? It was a woman's voice, hesitant and nervous. This is he. Who's calling? I just moved into the Crestview apartments. I'm in 1201. My hand froze. I heard from the property manager that you used to live downstairs from me. I wanted to ask, did anything strange ever happen in this apartment? Her voice was trembling slightly. Why do you ask? I said. Because. She paused, then lowered her voice to a whisper. Every night, I can hear a noise coming from downstairs. It sounds like someone is tap dancing. I stood there, stunned into silence for a good 10 seconds. The woman on the other end of the line kept talking. I want to talk to the new tenants downstairs, a family of 3, and they swore they never dance at night. I don't believe them. I even called the police, and they came and didn't find anything. Mr. Hayes, I'm going crazy. Do you know what's going on? I held the phone to my ear and looked at the blooming roses on my patio. The sun was bright. The flowers were beautiful. My golden retriever was rolling on the grass, showing me his belly. Everything was so real, so good. I smiled and spoke into the phone. Ma'am, I think you must be mistaken. That building has always been very, very quiet. I ended the call and blocked the number. I put down the watering can, wheeled myself back inside, and shut the sliding glass door. I turned off my computer. I turned off the lights. I sat there in the dark, savoring the hard-won, absolute, and perfect silence.